We do have reports about Hezbollah accepting a ceasefire. We have the U.S. envoy, Amos Hochstein, going to Lebanon to supposedly solidify a ceasefire that Lebanon's government has said Hezbollah has agreed to. Now, Israel is saying it's going to continue to bombard Lebanon. But I want you to react to the obvious contradiction here. What have you made of this overall situation regarding this talk of ceasefire? And what does it say about Israel? What does it say about the resistance and where it's at?
Well, the talk about a ceasefire is like the talk that we heard about a ceasefire in Gaza that we were hearing for so long, and it never got anywhere. At the moment, nothing has changed, and Hezbollah is not going to change its conditions. So we should ignore Western propaganda. Every few days, they're going to say something. They're going to claim that Hezbollah made new concessions, which is not true. Hezbollah is in a commanding position. The resistance in Lebanon is in a very commanding position, and the Israeli regime is in trouble, and they know it. Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the collective resistance will continue until they get what they demanded from the beginning. And what they demanded was something that the Americans had accepted. If you recall, months ago, the Americans said they put forward a ceasefire proposal, and they said Hamas was against it and the Israelis supported it. But the Israelis were saying we don't accept it, and Hamas was saying that, okay, let's work on this proposal. So the Americans were lying back then, they're lying now. There will be ultimately a ceasefire, but it will be a ceasefire that is imposed on the Israeli regime. But let me actually add something here, and that is, about what you were saying at the beginning of our discussion with regards to Israeli claims about destroying a fictional nuclear weapons program. First of all, Iran's nuclear program is deep underground. And all of the key elements of the program are deep underground. There are things on the surface, but all the key components are underground. And if this mythological if this mythical nuclear weapons program existed, it would be deep underground. It would not be on the surface where some missile can strike and destroy it. And why is it that the International Atomic Energy Agency has never spoken about this nuclear weapons program? I think it would be the first thing that the Israeli regime would want to do would be to ask the International Atomic Energy Agency or tell them where it is so that they can go and visit that site. They won't do that because it simply does not exist. But what I wanted to point out was that when the Israelis were striking Lebanon, they kept saying that we've destroyed Hezbollah's missile capabilities, we've destroyed Hezbollah's defense capabilities. And back then, I was also saying that Hezbollah's missile cities underground are inaccessible to the Israeli regime. And we've seen footage of a couple of them over the past few months. The Israelis cannot destroy them. And that's why Hezbollah is firing missiles. So if we go back a few months and remember, or a couple of months, and remember what the Israelis, or the last few weeks, and recall what the Israelis were saying about Lebanon, they were all lies. It was all just fake news. And so what the Israeli regime is saying about Iran, which is far more powerful, far larger, and far more capable of developing underground facilities, all of that is fake. But the situation in Lebanon right now, despite the Israeli regime targeting civilians, they're especially targeting communities and families that support the resistance. They're seeking out families. And by the way, they're seeking out medics. This is one of the really interesting things, or one of the most disturbing things, is that the Israelis hunt down medics across the country. And what is most disgusting is that, unlike in Gaza, in Lebanon, Western embassies and Western media have a permanent presence. They're there in Lebanon, they're in Beirut. They know, they see what's happening. They know that the Israelis are deliberately targeting families. In Gaza, they knew it too, but they pretended to say, well, we don't have any independent sources. The journalists in Gaza are, linked to Hamas or the resistance and that sort of nonsense. That's how they try to justify Israeli atrocities and the genocide in Gaza. And they will continue to do that for the months ahead. The Americans and the Europeans, Western media, Western diplomats, they will be on board with this genocide until the last Palestinian is killed. 1 year down the road, if this is still going on, they will continue to use the same narrative. But in Lebanon, it's impossible for them to do it because, they're doing it, but they don't have any excuse because they are there and they have local journalists and fixers and local staff who will tell them who these families are, who these children are who are being targeted, who these medics are who are being targeted. So that aside, though, the fact that the Israelis are targeting civilians in Lebanon, and they're also trying to create divisions between the different religious groups, and in order to and Western diplomats and Western embassies are working on this too. The Western embassies, in coordination with the Israelis, Western embassies in Lebanon, are trying to create internal strife. And their key ally, or at least one of their key allies, is Samir Jaja and the Lebanese forces, who were involved in the 1982 massacre in Beirut, the Sabra Shatila camp, where 3,500 Palestinians and Lebanese Shias were slaughtered within 36 hours. This person, Sami Jaja, and his henchmen, they are key allies of Western embassies. So, the West always chooses the most evil of people as their allies wherever they are, which reflects, it shows who they are. But so Western embassies are conspiring, and the Israelis and the West are working together, and Western NGOs and their people in Lebanon. But despite that, Hezbollah has done very well on the battlefield. They've been able to strike deep inside Palestine. And most importantly, the Israeli regime has succeeded in bringing everyone together in this region. All the old divisions that the West and the Israeli regime and their regional allies and proxies, all their attempts to divide the region, they failed. They tried to use religion, sectarianism, racism to divide the region. Arab versus Persian versus Kurdish, Shia versus Sunni, Muslim versus Christian. They've tried everything, one ethnic group against another. They've been doing this for over 40 years, and many billions of dollars have been spent, hundreds of billions of dollars, by U.S. proxies in the region, U.S. allies in the region, and the West. But now, today, we see that all of those attempts to divide the region, they've been swept away. And the unity among people in West Asia and North Africa is very high. And the same is true in Lebanon. The people in Lebanon and Hezbollah are on the same page. They're all together in this fight. And of course, there are those who are opposed to Hezbollah, like Sami Jaja, like the Lebanese forces, but they're a small minority compared to what existed before. Compared to the divisions that we had before, they're much smaller today. So the country is united on the whole. The West hasn't failed to create internal strife, and Hezbollah and the Israeli regime has failed on the battlefield, and they will face more humiliation in the days ahead.
What does this say then about Israel's so-called quote unquote strategy here? It seems to me that there's this dynamic where you have Iran able to protect itself, not just because of geography, but also because of Iran's military strength. But then you also have this overall a situation that Israel's pursuit of quote unquote victory for itself has been to kill as many people as possible, it seems like, in Gaza and in Lebanon. But in both of these cases, Professor Marandi, Israel is still fighting very hard. Israel has not taken a single village on the south of Lebanon. Hezbollah has been able to beat them back each and every time. And actually, Operation People of Might, Hezbollah's overall strategy of resistance against Israel at this time, it has taken over 100 IDF troops' lives, injured 1,000 plus more, nearly ruined 100 Israeli armored vehicles and drones. So, Professor Marty, what does it say about this overall pursuit of quote unquote victory through the destruction of the people as the resistance moves forward?
Yes, absolutely. It shows the vulnerability of the regime. I think that the injured is much higher than that, actually. But also, what has happened is that since the Israelis have been forced to take more troops away from Gaza, and remember, Hezbollah heroically, it began pounding Israeli positions from October the 8th last year in order to draw away troops from the south to help the people of Gaza and to help them defend themselves and to protect the children of Gaza from this genocide. But now the Israelis have sent most of their troops to the north, and that has helped the Palestinian resistance even more in Gaza because the Israelis have far less troops in the south than they had even a couple of months ago. And so we've seen more successes by Hamas and its allies, Islamic Jihad, in Gaza against the Israelis. And if you've seen some of the footage over the last 3-4 days, especially the footage given by Hamas, they've done some really important. They've carried out important operations against Israeli regimes, and they've killed a significant number of occupation soldiers. So now, and in Gaza, the resistance is able to again gain the initiative. One thing that I should though add here is that in northern Gaza, as you know, and as many of your viewers I'm sure know, because they're very politically aware people, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything new for many of your viewers, and I apologize for that. But in northern Gaza, we know that there's an extermination siege going on, and it's been going on for weeks now. And the Israeli regime is refusing supplies. In this starvation siege, and this is not linked to my response, I just want to add this for your viewers. The West is in bed with Israelis with regards to the starvation siege. In other words, the extermination siege. They all want to exterminate the Palestinians in northern Gaza. And the reason is very simple. If CNN, if the BBC, or these other mainstream Western media outlets, legacy media outlets, campaigned about northern Gaza, if they did rolling coverage just for a week, their governments would have so much pressure on them that they would end this. They would force the regime to end the starvation. But they won't do this because they don't want to disrupt what the Israeli regime is doing. Their diplomats won't do this. Their journalists won't do this. Their elites won't do this. Their politicians won't do this because they're all in this together to exterminate the Palestinians of northern Gaza. There's no doubt about it. Otherwise, this is the most important event. I mean, what Hezbollah is doing is outstanding, and it is absolutely amazing. But the most important thing that's happening in the world today is the extermination in northern Gaza. You have hundreds of thousands of people. I don't know the exact number. Let's say between 150 to 350, 400,000 people, whatever the number is. They are being exterminated as we speak. Not only are they being starved, but they're being hammered day and night. Just a couple of days ago, we saw them they bring down a 5-story building, slaughtering almost 100 people in one strike as they're starving these people. All CNN has to do, all MSNBC has to, forget Fox and them, they don't even pretend, but all Sky News has to do, all the New York Times has to do is to cover this day and night, 24 hours a day for just a week, and it would end. They'd be forced to end it. Senators and congressmen and women would have to do something because it would look horrible. But they will never do that. So the starvation siege continues. And that I think is another defeat for the Israelis because the world sees this. The world sees what's happening. The BBC cannot hide it. Sky News cannot hide it. Fox News cannot hide it. CNN, Canadian television, European, France 24, local television, none of them can hide it. The rest of the world sees it. And people across the United States and Europe, younger people, have seen it. And this, I think, is catastrophic for the regime. They're so bloodthirsty that they can't see what they're doing to themselves, but they've exposed themselves to the world as an illegitimate, deranged regime. And I think that's even more important than what the resistance in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Yemen, which is also astounding what they're doing. The United States is using strategic bombers to carpet bomb Yemen, but still they haven't been able to open the Red Sea. And Ansarullah continues to close the Red Sea. The ships that are heading to the Israeli ports or returning or that want to leave Israeli ports because they said we're implementing the Genocide Convention. The Americans carpet bomb Yemen to help the genocide, but the people of Yemen despite the carpet bombing, they will continue to implement the Genocide Convention. We are living in extraordinary times. The West has exposed itself, the collective West, to the world and to its own people. And the axis of resistance has become the hope of people across the world. Iran, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, Syria, which is playing a huge role, despite the fact that Erdogan and his terrorists in the north, and the United States and ISIS and its proxies in the east, and the Israelis in the south, and the Jordanians facilitating bombing raids against Syria through its airspace. All of this has not prevented Syria from, first of all, hosting 500,000 refugees from Lebanon, despite all these sanctions against Syria and all these problems, and also helping the resistance, not just in Lebanon, but in the West Bank, something that people will appreciate more in the months and years ahead.
Of course, you have Israel, the United States, and the West being exposed as the perpetrators of such a horrific crime and crimes against humanity. And then you have the resistance. They're the ones who are putting their bodies on the line. They're sacrificing so many people to end this. And I think that contrast is a powerful one that is only set to get more powerful as what seems to me to be the suicidal thing to do for Israel, which is to try to expand this conflict to Hezbollah and Iran to an even greater degree, which, in my estimation, I don't think Israel can handle this. Your final comment on this?
Oh, yes. Israel has lost the war. It cannot win in any exchange against Iran. All it's doing is it's trying to create an environment for the Americans to enter the war. And that again shows the true nature of the regime and Zionists. They don't care about Americans. They want Americans to be sacrificed for their regime. They want Europeans to be sacrificed for their regime. They want the Americans to give casualties and for the global economy to be wrecked for the sake of their regime. And Netanyahu is not even doing it for the Israeli regime. He's doing it for Netanyahu. And I think Netanyahu history will say that it was Netanyahu that really brought about the destruction of the Israeli regime. I don't know when it will collapse. There is a ceasefire. I think in Israel things will get much worse, and it will be downhill from there on very swiftly. Uh, Netanyahu may go to jail. He may be assassinated. Whatever happens to him, Israel will remember him as the person who did more than anyone else to destroy the Israeli regime. But they cannot win in any war. They can't defeat Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. They can't defeat Hezbollah. They cannot defeat Ansarullah. How are they going to defeat Iran? So their hope is that the Americans will get involved. But if the Americans do get involved, that will bring about the collapse of the global economy, because the Iranians will not allow the Americans to remain in the region. And if the Iranians begin to destroy the oil and gas assets in the Persian Gulf region or in the Caucasus, or when the Iraqi resistance sweeps the Americans out of Iraq, I think that you will see those regimes in the Persian Gulf, those family dictatorships, they will collapse within days. Imagine if there are heavy strikes on, let's say, the Emirates. Do you think that the Emirati regime will lapse? It will fall apart in a few days, if not hours. And the slaves in the Emirates would take over the country. All those millions of slaves from across the world, from the Philippines and the subcontinent and elsewhere, who are doing all the work, they will take over. It will be destroyed. So these are not regimes who can go to war. They will collapse, and so will everyone else. So I don't see a situation where the regime in Washington can win. But again, as I was saying at the beginning, I think that Biden or the deep state, or whatever you'd like to call it, and the Europeans who are affiliated to the US state, the current establishment, that they are pushing the United States towards a cliff. And whether it's, if you look at the outrageously fake assassination claims about Iran and Trump, with regards to Iran trying to assassinate Trump, if you look at the rush to provide the rest of the aid that the United States promised to Ukraine send it to Ukraine before January the 20th. If you see now the ATACMS being used to strike deep inside Russia, and then now, of course, the EU or the E3, the European three, the British, French, and Germans wanting to century run in the International Atomic Energy Agency. I see all of these as linked to one another, and an attempt by the outgoing team to put the United States in a situation where Trump is stuck and he has no room for maneuver.